Hello.
Whatever question he has asked, I don't think he has the answers. So
Hello.
Hello.
Can you listen to our audio?
Yeah, we can listen. We can listen.
Raghavendra, they can listen.
Okay. So let us start then. Yeah. Probably sorry for the delay because of the some audio connections. So let me welcome all MBTEL team for this webinar on DDRX technology. I am Raghavendra. I am part of analysis team, and I take care of all analysis activities at Würth SE and part of customer management also. So today in DDRX technology, we have lined up the agenda on to know what exactly is a memory, what is the history of memory and its application space, what are the types of RAMs that are available, differentiation between SDRAM, DDR SDRAM and QDR, RAM, CPU, machine cycle, computer system, complete memory hierarchy, and what was the evolution of DDR from DDR to the latest DDR5 comparison, and what are the packages and the DIMM modules that are available as part of the DDR technology. And also we will throw some insights into what is the lower version of DDR and GDDR, and we will make a small comparison also between the lower version of DDR as well as the graphics DDR. And finally we will also talk about the topologies that we commonly use, what are the options that are available as when I choose for a specific application. We will talk about buffered and unbuffered DIMM modules, and we will also talk about how exactly the signaling is part of DDR3 and DDR4. We may see that there may not be that much difference between the signaling of DDR4 and 5, apart from some key modifications where we will be talking about that in DDR4 key changes. And then we will talk about the routing guidelines, the routing priority that has to be set by the designer, and then we will talk about what are the timing specifications and what are the JEDEC specifications that has been defined by JEDEC for DDR2, DDR5. And then we will talk about what are the upcoming webinars available at Würth. So what is a memory? So generally when we talk about what is a memory, you can say that it is a fundamental requirement for any electronic equipment. So whether I talk about a computer, whether I talk about a mobile, whether I talk about any application, electronic specific application where data has to be repeatedly used to recollect the data, so we need memory. So this processed data will always be kept in memory and will be recalled as and when it is required. So that is the reason we say that memory has been an integral part of any electronic device. And when we talk about the history or the evolution of the first memory, so if you talk the first Selectron tube back in 1946 was invented by Rachman, so which was used on a digital computer memory. So it used to store the data in electrostatic charges. So the limitation of this Selectron tube was that it could only save at around 256 bits of data each time. So then the improvisation was made, and Fred Williams in 1947 came up with Williams tube. So Williams tube was able to store more information when compared to the Selectron tube, and it was very less expensive, and it had no restriction on the number of data bits that it could store. So this is the history of memory trends that we had in the early 1940s. When we talk about application space of memory, in application space of memory, we can see today any electronic gadget as memory. So application space wise, if we talk, it is a diversified application. If you say today we have our LED television, set-top box, everything has memory, including our network cards, anything you talk about today, whether you are talking about a gaming console, it has memory. We are talking about laptops, memory. You are having today, we are also getting memory in most of the electronic equipments, so that we can have the data in place in the memory and recollect and process it as and when required. What is my specific application that needs what quantity of memory is really required? Based on that, the designer says that this is the quantum of memory that I need for my applications based on my design complexity. So what is a SRAM? So random access memory, which is we also primarily call it as the working memory, is used for operating system or the CPU for faster access of data, which is being repeatedly used or constantly used. So when we talk about RAM, we have two types of RAM. One is the static RAM and one is dynamic RAM. So comparison wise, if you think static RAM is made up of flip-flops, DRAM is made up of transistors and capacitors. Data is stored in bits in case of static RAM. Data is stored as electrical charge in dynamic RAM. Bigger in size is our static RAM. Smaller in size is our dynamic RAM. Faster access speed in static RAM, whereas dynamic RAM has slower access speed. Static RAM is expensive. DRAM is relatively cheaper. Data retention is very good in static RAM, which may have possibility of leakage in DRAM. Data can possibly leak in terms of DRAM. So static RAM primarily used for the cache memory. Cache memory is nothing but the memory that will be between your processor and your primary memory, which acts as a channel path for frequently used data. So whereas in DRAM, again, it is used as the main memory. So further, when we go and talk about what are the types of RAM that are available, we have the asynchronous DRAM. So asynchronous DRAM, we have the memory controller, IO bus, and RAM. So here the memory controller really does not know when the data is available at the RAM, so that it can read the data or write the data, because the simple reason is the RAM is not synchronized with the CPU clock. So to overcome this, we brought synchronous DRAM. So in synchronous DRAM, we could overcome this difficulty. Now the memory controller exactly knows when the data is going to be available at the RAM, so that it can read or it can write the data, because RAM is in synchronous with the CPU clock. So this is about the synchronous DRAM. So again, when we talk about the synchronous DRAM, we can see on the module of the RAM, it would have been written as PC100. What exactly this PC100 means is, it would be the internal clock frequency, so which is 100 megahertz. So when we talk about the bandwidth, it tells that, okay, 100 multiplied by 64 bits divided by 8 bits will give you the bandwidth. So we can say that, okay, this particular PC100 module can have 800 megabits per second of data transfer. SDRAM. SDRAM was used primarily because we were able to clock one data once per one clock period. That is, we were able to, for the entire clock, we used to clock data for only one clock period. So here, if you talk about what is the speed, if I say I have 100 megahertz of my clock, then I was able to transmit 100 megabits per second of data. So here we never had the option of doubling the data. So why did this? We desperately needed a faster DRAM was simple, because our processor were all up to say pretty much on the faster side in terms of the clock frequency, whereas our RAM modules or DRAM modules were not capable to handle that speed. So that is the reason we got into the evolution of the DDR. So from SDRAM we evolved to DDR SDRAM. Okay, in DDR SDRAM, it is the, instead of latching the data for one clock period, we used to latch the data for both rising edge as well as falling edge. If you can see in channel A, if I was able to clock 933 megahertz of data, for channel B also I can clock the same amount of data, which is 933 megahertz. Together for one clock period, I used to get 1866 megahertz of data. So this is the specialty of DDR technology. So then came the existence of DDR, DDR2, DDR3, 4, and today we have DDR5. So QDR SDRAM. So QDR SDRAM, if you talk about it, is very much similar to DDR, but only thing is that, okay, here as we say QDR, that is quad data rate. So we want to double the data rate of DDR. So when we want to double the data rate of DDR, then we need to have additional clock, which is 90-degree in phase shift for the actual clock. So I have one clock which is without any phase shift, then I have the other which is with phase shift of 90-degree. So when I have this phase shift, then I will be able to get 2 rising edge and 2 falling edge. So because of which I can achieve a maximum of 3732 megahertz of data. So In the right hand side, you can see now I have 2 rising edge and 2 falling edge. So which is almost double the traditional DDR. So because of which we were able to achieve the quad data rate. So this is about QDR SDRAM. So when we talk about a CPU or a RAM machine cycle, when we talk, so if I say I have the processor, so I have the fetch. So first it will fetch the data from the memory and start it to decode that particular data. Once it decodes the data, then it has to execute the data. So the processed instruction will be executed and we will have the data stored in the memory. And again further, the cycle repeats. Again it fetches the data from the memory where it will be stored, and again it decodes, executes and stores. So this is a repetitive cycle. So this machine cycle depends on what actual execution or actual program execution is being happening for a specific task. So when we talk about computer system memory hierarchy, so when we say I have the processor and I have the high speed memory, which we also call it as cache memory, and then I have the primary memory, which is my DIMM module, and I have the secondary memory, which is my hard disk. So this is the hierarchy of my memory when I talk about a computer system. So now when the processor wants to execute a specific task or set of instructions, then it takes that instructions depending on how frequently it is used from the cache memory, or it reads from the primary memory. So based on that, the computer process on the defined number of machine cycles executes the processes, and then the final data that will be processed will be stored in the secondary memory, which we call it as our hard disk. At any given point of time, when I switch off my computer system, no data will be available in my primary memory. So that is my DIMM module. So evolution, when we talk about DDR, so back in 1998 we got our first SDRAM. In 2000 we got DDR. In the year 2003 we got DDR2. In the 2007 we got DDR3, and in 2012 we got DDR4, and in 2020 we got our DDR5. So though these are all the release date with respect to the specifications, so the date may be different in different website, because it would either be the release date of the JEDEC specification could be a little late. If you see DDR5, we got the JEDEC specification in late 2020. So that is the reason some of the articles or some of the technical newsletters may suggest that okay, DDR5 is 2021, but actually DDR5 is 2020, because the JEDEC specification was released last year itself. So this is the evolution of our DDR from 1998 till date, which is 2020. So when we talk about DDR memory controller, which is having 2-bit prefetch and the voltage was 2.5 volt. So here you can see the RAM internal clock frequency 133 megahertz, clock frequency was also 133 megahertz, because of which we were able to achieve data rate of just 266 mega transfers per second. And the module rating will be PC2100, and for 200 megahertz, similarly we were able to have clock frequency of 200 megahertz, data rate was 400 mega transfers per second, and the module rating was PC3200. So the module rating comes with multiplication of your 8 bits. So 400 I multiply by 8, which gives me my module rating, which is 4 8s are 32, which comes to 3200 is my module rating. So similarly for DDR, the only thing is that voltage reduced from 2.5 to 1.8 volt, and the prefetch increased from 2-bit to 4-bit. So prefetch is nothing but okay, when the processor is executing the current instruction set, so it has the capability to fetch the next instruction to be executed. So this bit, as it increases, the speed definitely will increases, because the time required to process the instructions will be much faster. So this is about the number of prefetch bits increases, that gives the excess speed for our memory. So when I talk about here, internal clock frequency of 100, clock frequency of 200, data rate of 400 mega transfers per second, and module rating PC23200. So when in the previous it was PC is for DDR, PC2 is for DDR2, and in the next slides we may see PC3 and PC4, which is for DDR3 and DDR4. Similarly, for the RAM internal clock frequency of 200 MHz, clock frequency was 400 MHz and data rate was 800 mega transfers per second, and module rating was PC26400. Similarly, when we come for DDR3, here we can see that gradually the prefetch bit was increased from 4, now it is 8. So because of which our voltage also dropped from 1.5 volt for the DDR3 and 1.35 for the lower version of DDR3. So now our internal RAM clock frequency 100 megahertz, clock frequency came to 400, data rate 800 mega transfers per second, and module rating PC36400. Similarly, internal clock frequency is available for 266.6 megahertz and clock frequency 1066.6 megahertz and data rate 2133.3 mega transfers per second, and the module rating is PC31700. So in DDR4, not much changed, but the advantage is again 8-bit prefetch remained, but the voltage was significantly reduced from 1.5 to 1.2 volt and 1.1 volt in case of low power DDR4. So internal clock frequency of 200, clock frequency 800, data rate is 1600 mega transfers per second. Module PC4 12800, 400 megahertz clock frequency and clock frequency is 1600 megahertz. Data rate 3200 mega transfers per second, and PC4 25600 is the module rating. So good comparison if you do with DDR is that the operating voltage of DDR, if you see 2.5 and DDR2 SSTL 1.8 volt, DDR3 SSTL 1.5 volt, and DDR4 POD 1.2 volt, and DDR5 also runs on POD. So in the upcoming slides, I will be also telling what exactly is this POD technology. We call it as pseudo open drain. And prefetch buffer size was 2, 4, 8, 8, and 16 in case of DDR5, because of which we were able to achieve up to 6 Gbps of data rate in DDR5. So chip density, if you talk in DDR, 128 to 1 GB, 128 MB to 4 GB in DDR2, 512 MB to 8 GB in DDR3, 2 GB to 16 GB in DDR4, and 8 GB to up to 64 GB in case of DDR5. So the data rate you can see maximum is 400, 800 in DDR2, 2133 in DDR3, 3200 in DDR4, and 6400 in DDR5. Bank groups not available until DDR3, and in DDR4 we have the bank groups option for 4, and in DDR5 we have 8. So termination ODT, in DDR we didn't have on-die termination, we had to depend on on-board termination. In DDR2 we had ODT enabled. In DDR3 we got ODT, which is dynamic when compared to DDR4. In DDR4 similar to dynamic modes, but we had the park modes and nominal ER by RD. So here also we have the option of dynamic ODT in case of DDR4 as well as DDR5. And IO clock in megahertz, we had 200 maximum in case of DDR, 533 in DDR2, 1200 in DDR3, 2400 in case of DDR4, 3200 in case of DDR5. So DIMM pins we had 184, 240, 240. In DDR4 and DDR5 we got 288 pins in the DIMM module. So channel width is again 64, 64 in DDR, DDR2, DDR3, and in DDR4 also we had 64. In DDR5 we have the option to have 2 separate channels with 32 bit or a single channel with 64 bit. So this flexibility is in DDR5 only and not available in DDR4 and from DDR3 or DDR2 or even DDR. So when I talk about SDRAM packages that are available, we have the dual inline package, then we have the single inline module, and we have the dual inline module. So you can see that the difference between single inline module and dual inline module is that in single inline module you have the number of pins only on the top side of the PCB, because of which we may not get higher bandwidth of memory, whereas in dual inline module you have memory chips mounted back to back, because we have the connecting pins on top layer as well as on bottom layer, because of which we get higher bandwidth. So here is the quick view of DIMM packages that are available. So when we talk about DDR1, 2.5 volt, 184 pins, 1.8 volt, 240 pins in DDR2, 1.5 volt DDR3, and 240 pins, 1.2 volt in case of DDR4, and we have 288 pins in case of DDR4. 1.2 volt in DDR4 and 288 pins, and 288 pins remains same even in case of DDR5. SODIMM packages. So SODIMM packages are something similar to the DIMM packages, but they are smaller in size when compared to the normal DIMM packages. So here you can see significantly that the pin count has been significantly dropped. So you can see we have 200 pins in DDR, again 200 pins in case of DDR2. In DDR3 again we have 204 pins, whereas the normal DIMM module used to have 288 pins. So what is this low power DDR? So generally we call it as low power DDR or MDDR because of its terminology. MDDR because it was primarily used for mobile platform applications. So that is the reason we call it also as mobile DDR or low power DDR. So this consumes less power when compared to the actual DDR, and significantly it is used for low power applications, whether it is the tablets or mobiles or any other gaming devices which are handheld and compact in nature. So when we talk about such devices, again we have the same classification. We have the LPDDR version in 1, 2, 3 and 4. Here we have another option where we call it as LPDDR-X, which we call it as low power DDR extreme. So this has slight more power saving capability when compared to the normal LPDDR4. A quick comparison of low power DDR. So LPDDR2, 3 and 4, 1.8 volt, 1.2 volt and 1.1 volt. Data speeds 1066 Mbps maximum, 2133 Mbps maximum, and 4267 Mbps maximum in case of DDR4. Prefetch again optional in case of DDR2. You have for 4 or 2, in LPDDR3 8 and in LPDDR4 16 bit. Chip densities 64 MB to 8 GB in LPDDR2, 1 GB to 32 GB in case of LPDDR3, LPDDR4 again 4 GB to 32 GB. So bus length we have around 16, 8 and 4 as options, and LPDDR3 we have only 8, and in LPDDR4 16 and 32. So CA pins we have 10 in case of 2 and 3, and only 6 present in LPDDR4. So when we had talked about LPDDR in the previous slides, we will talk about GDDR also. So many of us may not be implementing this unless and until we are intended into a specific market, that is the graphic card design. So if at all some company deals with designing graphic cards, so such companies will be more knowledgeable about this GDDR interfaces. So these are nothing but the memories specifically used for graphics card, rendering the graphics card. So graphics cards, we get now a dedicated graphics cards where the graphics cards are isolated from your motherboard, and now you have integrated graphics card built in within your motherboard. So these are two options that are available. So wherever we use this GDDR, we still have the same options available. Only thing is that okay, up to GDDR6. So we have DDR only till 5, but in case of GDDR we have gone till GDDR6. The same versions available as similar to LPDDR as well as DDR. So a quick comparison again on those GDDR. So if you see GDDR and 2, 3 as well as GDDR4, we have in GDDR4 NVIDIA and ATI. So if you see the maximum frequency is 200, 500, 900, and in GDDR4 we have 1.2, and in ATI we have almost 1.4 gigahertz. And configuration wise, you can say 4M into 32 until DDR2, and 4M 8M into 32 and 8M into 32 in case of NVIDIA, GDDR4 and GDDR3. Only case of ATI we have 16M into 32. So prefetch again is 2N, 4N, 4N, and NVIDIA 4N, and ATI we have 8N. Package we have 144 ball FPGA for all until GDDR3, and only in case of GDDR4 we have 136 ball FPGA. So interface again everything is SSTL. From GDDR3 onwards only we got POD, which is our pseudo open drain, and bank we have 4 until GDDR3, and only in GDDR4 we have 8 banks. Voltage 2.5, 2.5, and For GDDR3 we had 1.8, and even for GDDR4 also we have 1.8, and for both NVIDIA and ATI, GDDR4 1.8 volt is still there. So addressing, again I talk about, it is single until GDDR3. Either it can be single or double, and it is double in case of ATI. So when we talk about DDR topologies, so what are the topologies that are commonly used in today's, whenever I choose a memory, whether it could be DDR3 or DDR4, the common topologies generally we use is flyby topology. From DDR3 onwards, we started using flyby topology, unless and until it is really application specific, where I need to go for balanced T topology. So when I talk about flyby topology, I have the memory controller, I have the memory, and then I route all my data point to point, and then I have the address where it will be routed for the first SDRAM, where there will be, now if you talk within respect to your data and address, there will be a delay of delta T. So all the strobe data reaches the memory simultaneously, whereas the address reaches with a delay. So that delay is indicated by delta T. For first memory to second memory, it is indicated through delta T1. For second to third, it is indicated through delta T2. Excuse me. Okay. Similarly, from 2 to 3, it is indicated through delta T2 and delta T3 between from my third to fourth memory. So to overcome this, we have a concept called as right leveling. So these delays are auto-generated and can be calibrated to overcome the delay between your clock, data, and address. So this concept we call it as right leveling. So whatever I indicated, this delta is auto-generated delay files. When we run the simulations, it generates an auto-generated delay file, which is calibrated using the ZQ pin that is available in the processor. When we talk about balanced T topology, we have the memory controller, and here we have the SDRAM, and we have data being routed point to point, and then we have address clock where it forms a T and then distributes to both the DRAM. So here we do not have any complexity in addressing the timing issues. The timing budget is pretty much tight in case of T topology, because we do not have any lag or any delay between my address control and clock. So there is no concept of right leveling required in case of T topology. The only disadvantage is that, okay, in case of SDRAM 1 and SDRAM 2 memories, if I don't mount on any one memory, then the remaining section acts as stub. So that is one disadvantage we get in T topology. Also, the other thing is that, okay, we cannot have higher bandwidth with T topology, whereas with flyby topology we can have significant bandwidth, but in T topology it is very much restricted, because you may have to go with two T topology, that is balanced double T topology. So here you have the same T topology, but it is replicated in two T's. So this we call it as balanced double T topology. Okay, very much similar to single T topology, whereas here the other thing is just replicated, just to increase the bandwidth. So again, choosing topology based on die package. So if you're having a single die package, then the best option is either you can go for T topology or flyby topology. Whereas if you have double die package, you can go for double balanced T topology, which is better rather than going for flyby topology. And if you talk about quad die package, flyby topology is the best suited topology when you have the quad die package. So these are all some of the topologies as shown in example. So you have the T topology on the left side, and daisy chain topology and flyby topology. So the daisy chain topology and flyby topology are pretty much same. Only thing is that, okay, what is the stub that you are going to create between your memory and the processor based on what stackup you are going to use, whether you are going to use a 6-layer stackup or a 8-layer stackup or a 10-layer stackup. Based on that, if you are going to say that, okay, whether it is a daisy chain topology or flyby topology, very minimal changes you can see between daisy chain topology and flyby topology. So So this is the other forms of topologies that are commonly used. So you have double balanced tree topology on the right hand side, and similarly various configurations that are available as a user to choose. Okay. Now when we talk about symmetrical and asymmetrical topology, here you can see that on the right hand side the topology divides exactly with equi between these two memories and these two memories, hence we call it as symmetrical. So if I say this is my T, so the left T and the right T are pretty much the same, so hence we call it as symmetrical T topology. Whereas if I see here, so that this particular T section is not formulated properly, whereas this is having lesser length and this is having the highest length. So in this case we call this as asymmetrical T topology. So DDR bus options that are available and the advantage and disadvantage, if you talk, T topology is difficult in routing, whereas flyby topology is easy and you can finish it up faster than the traditional T topology. Performance wise, if you talk, excellent, but as I told you, bandwidth is going to be very much important when you are doing with T topology. Whereas flyby topology, good, it offers very good bandwidth. Load handling, if it is T topology, difficult, and it is very much sensitive to larger loads, whereas flyby topology, easy and unaffected by larger loads. So timing skews, minimal issues. In fact, I can say no issues, because the timing is much better when you do T topology, whereas flyby topology, you need to introduce the concept of leveling, whether it is read leveling or write leveling. So signal integrity in terms, T topology is good, but flyby topology is best. T topology is still good enough, because if you do not foresee any option that okay, you are not going to mount or unmount any other memory what you have chosen, then if you unmount that, then the possibility of that creating stubs is the only question. Otherwise, if you have that particular memory on the PCB, then I think from signal integrity perspective also it is good enough. Now we talk about what are buffered and unbuffered DIMMs. So simple DIMM modules, okay, in buffered you have a buffer between the memory and the processor, whereas in unbuffered DIMM you will not have anything between the processor and memory. That is the simple definition between your buffered DIMM module and unbuffered DIMM module. So simple example, if you talk, as I told you that okay, it is memory in a computer that has a register between your DRAM and system memory, and unbuffered there won't be any register. So it is more stable when compared to unbuffered DIMM, more costly as compared to unbuffered memory is your buffered DIMM. Unbuffered DIMM are less when compared to buffered DIMM. Known as your registered memory, because you have the registers, it is also known as unregistered or unconventional memory, used for lessening the electrical load on the memory controller, whereas it generates more electrical load on the primary memory. High reliability can be achieved using buffered DIMM modules. Reliability will be less when compared to the unbuffered DIMM. Used for servers and other critical applications where it requires that okay, the operating is going to be very much stable. In that case only we use buffered DIMM modules. Unbuffered DIMM modules can be used for desktops and laptops and other applications where data is not going to be that significantly very much important. So buffered DIMM, again, it has one clock fewer when compared to unbuffered DIMM. It has no clock cycle penalty. So now when we talk about signaling groups that is available, so if you see in DDR3 and DDR4, pretty much if you see in data, there won't be any change. You have from DQ0 to DQ31, and in DM data mask you have DM0 to DM3, and in DQS you have DQS to DQS3. Address again 0 to 17. You have BA 0 to 2, CAS, RAS, and V. Whereas in control you have CS, ODT, CKE, and in differential you have one differential clock. So this is the pretty much same. Whereas when we go for DDR4 signaling group, the additional thing that you are going to get is the DBI. I will explain you what exactly is this DBI. So the data remains again the same. Along with data mask, you have the option for DBI. DBI is going to be a very significant factor in DDR4, which is going to make sure that your power consumption is going to be significantly reduced when you use the DBI option. Whereas again, if you see DQS, unchanged you have DQ0 to DQ3, and address you have 0 to 17, BA0 to 2, and you have the BG0 to 2, ACT, BC, CAS, RAS, parity, and write enable. These are all some signals additional when compared to the DDR3. So if you talk about the control signals, again you have CS, CS0, 1, 2, ODT, and CKE. So we have more chip select signals when compared to DDR3. And differential clock, we have one differential clock which was same as what in case of DDR3. So what are the key changes that we see, or what we saw from DDR when migrating from DDR3 to DDR4? So the new VPP supply was there, and the VRFQ pin was removed in case of DDR4, which existed in DDR3. The IO buffer was changed from SSTL to POD, that is the pseudo open range. Then we got the concept of DBI, which is data bus inversion, and added ACT underscore M control. So let us go one by one changes what we got. So here, whenever we say we have the on the horizontal side we have the word line, and the vertical side we have the bit line. This has to be at certain voltage. So this voltage was earlier DDR3 used to utilize this, which used to pump higher word line voltage within the die itself. Now this particular voltage is being given by separate enabler from the DDR4, which we call the VPP voltage rail, okay, which takes 2.5 volt and enables this word line voltage. So because of this, you can see that okay, the space on the die will be reduced as compared to what was there in case of DDR3. So significantly this has reduced some space on the die of the DDR4 because it is being externally now generated, which was earlier generated internally in case of DDR3. So you can see the configuration of DDR3 SDRAM and DDR4 SDRAM. You can see that okay, the reference DQ pin is removed. So this reference DQ pin, okay, has been specifically told by JEDEC that okay, it does not tell okay how to calibrate this VRF DQ pin. So this can be calibrated over a wide range by the user, okay, and there is no specific value that has to be set, which is clearly defined by JEDEC. So it has the user option to choose what should be the VRF DQ based on the application or based on the settings that you need to do in case of DDR4. So here again we see the IO buffer is changed from SSTL technology to POD. So in DDR3 you can see on the right hand side we had one pull-up resistor and one pull-down resistor, because of which the IO buffer used the traditional SSTL technology, whereas in the DDR4 you can see we have only the pull-up. So because of which the switching current when driving the data enables us to use the DBI option. So whenever I use the POD, it enables the switching current when we drive the data, since only zeros consume power when the data is stored, and additional switching savings can be realized by enabling the DBI. So we always intend that okay, the DBI option, so more number of ones should be there rather than zeros, so which enables us to save the additional power. And this is also good because it also reduces the simultaneous switching output noise. When we have more number of zeros, we have more SSO. So the number of zeros, if it is reduced and made as one, then that will significantly reduce the SSO, because of which the crosstalk will be much better, and also you will get better eye opening when you are dealing with your data signals. So this is the concept data bus inversion. So here the concept is pretty much similar. Okay, you can see on the right hand side with DBI. So we have all these ones. I am not going to enable my DB because I have ones which is good for me because SSO is less and power consumption also is less. So on the other side you can see all are zeros. So here I will enable the DBI. So all these zeros will become 1. So the DBI will automatically foresee that okay, the number of bits, okay, if 3 zeros are stored, immediately it will indicate the DBI to go high and invert those zeros to 1, because of which we will be able to achieve better SSO as well as crosstalk can be minimized, and also power consumption is much better when we have ones. So this is the concept of data bus inversion, which is only available in DDR4 and DDR and not available in DDR3. Okay, and here we have one more option in DDR4, which is act_n. This particular pin can either be high or low. Okay, whenever it is high, we have the RAS CAS V and address A0 to A13. Okay, so here you can see that, okay, whenever it is high, it behaves as RAS CAS and VE, whereas when it is low, it will act as additional address pins A14, A15 and A16. So this is the added advantage of using DDR4. Either you have the option to make it low as well as high, so which gives you additional 3 bits of address. So you can have better bandwidth by having better address lines also. So because of which this provision is only available in DDR4 again. So when we talk about what are the routing guidelines, so pretty much same. When I say that, okay, I have the memory controller and I have the SDRAM4 and SDRAM1, make sure that, okay, the last pin of this particular processor and last pin of the processor in the other bank have equidistance from your SDRAM4 and SDRAM1. So why I say that, okay, A1 should be equal to A2 is that, okay, because of which, so the data what is being routed will be much easier to length match. Okay, and we may have to spend less time in length matching because the distance, if it is maintained appropriately. And one more thing, we also make sure that, okay, the distance between the RAMs also should be maintained equal. B1, B2, B3 should be equal. So once when it is equal, it is good for the designer to replicate or copy whatever is the routing that is being done from SDRAM1 to SDRAM. He can easily replicate and copy it until SDRAM4, which saves a lot of time. So placement plays a very important role when you are dealing with DDR. So if you can follow a proper fixed placement, then you can play with and reduce the time in routing those signals. So again, when we talk about the grouping of signals, we can have data, address, command control, and clocks. So this is the set of grouping that we do for the DDR3 or 4 signals. So what is the order or what is the priority? See, many documents suggest that, okay, you first make a preliminary power planes and then go for routing data, then address, then command, and then clock. So if you see that way, it is really difficult to do so because you do not know whether you are within the power plane that you have defined. Is it going to be the reference for your address signals or data signals? Instead, we have a frequently used flow where we route all the data signals first, and then we route all our address command signals, and then we route our control signals, and then we route our clock signals, and then we finish up with power planes. So this is the best hierarchy or the sequential method of planning your DDR routing order. So general routing guidelines, 45-degree angles, not 90-degree. Probably we will be using arc routing in case of DDR5. Avoid T-junction for critical nets or clocks. Avoid T-junctions greater than 75 picoseconds, that is approximately 25 mils. Do not allow signals to cross splits. Restrict routing other signals closer to system reset signals. Assume that, okay, your design has address lines and you're taking your reset signal. Please do make sure that, okay, have sufficient spacing between your address lines and your reset signals so that does not interfere with your address signals. Avoid routing memory signals like other interfaces. Assume that, okay, I have a PCI interface which is running very close to my DDR interface. So in that case, I should at least make sure that, okay, more than 25 mils, if possible, more than 50 mils is given between my DDR interface and my PCI interface. So this should be kept in mind. And all signals within DQ group should be matched with a skew of not more than plus or minus 10 picosecond, which is 50 mils. So parallelism, when you are routing signals, okay, where you have two adjacent layers, in that case, if your parallel trace is running for 5 mils or less than 0.5 inch, then you have to go for 1x spacing. So in case of 10 mils, you have to go with the 2x spacing, and 15 mils, you have to go with 3x spacing. So when I talk about DQ, DQS, or that complete data group length matching, all signals within a given byte line must be matched within a maximum deviation of 10 picosecond. As I told, plus or minus 50 mils in the same layer, it has to be matched. It is not that, okay, you are going to route 4 bits of data in one layer and another 4 bits in another layer, where the reference for 4 bits is ground and the reference for another 4 bits is your 1.5 volt or 1.2 volt. So this is not acceptable. If you are routing data with respect to ground as reference, you make sure that, okay, all 8 bits are routed with reference to ground. Ensure all signals within a grid, the same concept, and DQ, DQS, DM signals don't need to be in order. That doesn't mean that, okay, you have to match, okay, first data group, that is your DQ0, DQS0 and DM0, all that does not have to be in same order of length matching. It can be on what is the longest DQS that is available within the group. Based on that, you are going to length match your DQS signal. Okay, so DQS to clock length matching. So for memory interfaces with leveling, the timing between your DQS and clock signals in each device individually should be calibrated dynamically to meet the TDQSS, which is the setup time. So it should make sure that, okay, this queue should not become larger, so that leveling is going to be a problem. So make sure that, okay, when we are routing, we should ensure that, okay, DQS and clock signals for each trace as its own length, which not exceeds the TDQSS. So this TDQSS value can be taken from the memory data sheet, where they say that, okay, TDQSS for a specific clock frequency, it would have been defined in the data sheet of your memory, or else you can refer to the ZX specification document. So propagation delay of clock signal must not be shorter than the propagation delay of DQS signal at every device. That is simple as CKI, that is I is the number of devices, minus DQSI should be greater than 0, where 0 less than I less than number of components cannot be lesser than 1. So total skew of clock and DQS signal between groups is less than 1 clock cycle. So because of which maximum CKI plus DQSI minus minimum CKI plus DQSI less than 1 should multiplied by TCK. Again, TCK is nothing but the clock what you are going to operate. So this TCK value also can be found in your data sheet, or it can be found in the ZX specification document. So the data routing is an example I have shown in one of our boards what we have designed. So this is how it has to be routed. So here the thing is that, okay, all data lines D0 to D7 are routed in single layer and with reference to one particular plane and in one layer. So address, command and routing guidelines. So route all address and command to match the clock signals within a tolerance of plus or minus 25 mils, plus or minus 25 picosecond and 125 mils. I have given option of both picosecond as well as mils. Why? Because Allegro allows you to do both. So you can do your phase tuning in terms of either time, or you can do in terms of length. So when you do in terms of length, make sure it is plus or minus 125 mils from each memory component. And whenever you are dealing with phase tuning within Allegro constraint editor, you can go with plus or minus 25 picosecond. So similar to the clock signals in DDR3 SDRAM, address and command signals are routed in a daisy chain topology. The first SDRAM from the first to the last SDRAM, ensure that each net maintains the same consecutive order. So if you're routing from SDRAM 1 to 2, you have routed A0 to A7. So it should be same in all the layers. It is not that, okay, in one layer you are going to do A0 to A7, next layer you are changing from A7 to A14 or A15. So that should not be the pattern. It should be same. Unbuffered DIMMs are more susceptible to crosstalk and generally noisier than buffered DIMM. As I told you that, okay, unbuffered DIMMs are potential targets for crosstalk because they do not have any buffer between your primary memory and the DIMM module. So that is the reason it is more possible or susceptible for crosstalk. DIMMs route the address and command signals of unbuffered DIMMs on a different layer than DQDM. So this is one way you can avoid that. So make sure that, okay, address command signals when you are using unbuffered DIMMs, make sure they're separately routed in another layer, or if possible have sufficient spacing of more than at least 100 or 150 mils spacing between those signals. So do not route differential clock and clock enabled signals close to the address signal lines when you are using the unbuffered DIMMs. So parallelism again remains the same as it was for address lines. 5 mils for parallel runs of 0.1 inch, 1x spacing 10 mils, 2x spacing 15 mils, 3x spacing, and 20 mils 4x spacing. So this is the reference of address signals that are routed. So when I say that, okay, this is routed in one layer, it has to be routed until it is going to your VTT termination. All should be routed in one layer. It is not that, okay, I route this in this layer and this will be routed in this layer. It should not be done that way. So clock routing guidelines: route clocks on inner layers with outer layers run lengths L to under 500 mils. Always better to put your clocks in internal layer if possible. Provide sufficient spacing for your clocks, or else you shield your clock signals. That is the best thing that you can do. And the wire pattern, if it is as shown like this, it should be ground, then your clock positive, clock negative, and again ground. So this should be the via pattern shielding for your clock signals. So clock signals, again, length matching, it should contain length matching between clock pairs, should be either plus or minus 5 picosecond or plus or minus 25 mils. So differential clocks need to maintain length matching between positive and negative within plus or minus 2 picosecond or plus or minus 10 mils. So spacing guidelines. So whenever we talk about spacing guidelines, you can see that, okay, when always make sure that the signals related to memory interface are routed between appropriate ground or power layers. Either your signals should refer to a solid power plane or solid ground plane. So for DQ, DQS, and DM traces, at least maintain at least 3H spacing between the edges for those traces. From any edge, 3H spacing is mandatory. 3H spacing is nothing but H is the distance between your plane closest to the return path of the plane that the signal is going to see. So for address command control signals, again, maintain at least 3H spacing between the edges for these traces. For clock traces, possibly go for 5H spacing as compared to 2H in case of data and address. So power planes, again, this is the sample layout of power plane split that is done for a DDR interface. And some critical design guidelines. So clock nets, strobes are routed differentially, so it has to be a maximum of 4 inch plus or minus 25 mils. Net length from driver to first DIMM should always be between 2 to 3 inch. That is what I told in the first slide, that whenever you are placing your memory and controller, make sure that, okay, the distance is maintained properly. If you maintain that distance with equidistance, then it is easy for you to achieve this 2 inch or 3 inch depending on what is the load that is going to be there on your memory. And net length between DIMM or chips should be 0.5 inch. So that means between your chips, it should not exceed more than 0.5 inch. Net length from last DIMM to chip to the VTT termination should again be less than 0.55 inch. Typically, it has to be between 0.2 and 0.4, but as per the guidelines given from many manufacturers, it says that, okay, it is okay up to 0.55 inch as well. All DQ, DQS signals should be minimized to reduce the skew within the group and across the group. So as short as possible, if you route DQ, DQ signals, it is always better. Skew between address nets should be 200 mil address, and command nets are daisy chained and with VTT pull up for the termination. And for the impedance, if you talk for single-ended, it is 50 ohms, and for differential, it is 100 ohms for the DDR3 or 4 signals. Again, design guidelines, critical constraints: route the differential clocks and data strobe with a length matching between P and N of 2 picosecond. That is again plus or minus 10 mils. Route the DQS, DQS negative associated with the DQ group on the same PCB layer match these DQS pairs to within plus or minus 5 picosecond, that is again 125 mils. Set the DQS and its DQS negative as the target. So as I told that, okay, you should always reference the DQS in a group. DQS is your reference to length match other signals. If DQS is say 0.55 inch, then that becomes your reference to all other signals from D0 to D7, including your data mask. Route the data and data mask signals for the DQ group ideally on the same layer, okay, which was covered in the other guidelines. Route the clock and clock set target propagation delays for the DQ group and clock to plus or minus 50 picosecond for all the DQS and associated DQS signals. Route the address control signal groups ideally on the same layer as the clock within plus or minus 20 picoseconds skew of the clock and clock negative traces. So whenever we are routing, we should make sure that, okay, address and clock signals are in the same layer with sufficient spacing between address signals and clock signals. So when we talk about PCB layout, we have the guidelines that is defined by IPC that, okay, you need to follow for class 1, class 2, class 3. This should be the pad size, this should be the solder paste or paste mask should be this much. So these are all the guidelines that IPC defines for PCB. Now for memory, who defines that? It is JEDEC. So JEDEC is nothing but Joint Electronic Device Engineering Council Solid State Technology Association, which defines what should be the standard for the memory controller, okay, and what are the parameters that it defines it should meet to meet the compliance for DDR. So the JEDEC specifications for DDR is JESD 79F is the JEDEC specification for DDR. DDR2 JESD 79-2F for DDR2. DDR3 JESD 79-3F for DDR3, and for low power DDR again JESD 79-3-1A and DDR4 JESD 79-4. So the document number remains the same, that is JESD 79, and it depends whether it is for 1, 2, 3 based on the number that indicates. If it indicates 4, it is for DDR4. If it indicates 5, it is for DDR5. So this is the JEDEC specification standard that is referenced whenever we are dealing with setup and hold time for DDR or DDR versions. So now when we talk about timing, so here you can see that, okay, I have the clock and I have my setup time and hold time. So setup time is nothing but whenever your VILAC crosses with respect to your reference. So whenever you are talking with VILAC, then it should with VIHAC. So this window with respect to your VILAC and VIHAC is defined as your setup time. So if I take this is my setup time, and similarly hold time. If I say VILDC and VIHDC, so this defines my hold time. So here for this timing, we can latch the signals either for 1T timing or 2T timing. So when do we decide that we have to go for 1T timing or 2T timing? So when my address bus is heavily loaded, then I will definitely go for 2T timing because I get better margin in my setup and hold time. Whereas my address bus, when it is not heavily loaded, then I choose to go for 1T timing, which gives me sufficient setup and hold time margin that is enough for me for my JEDEC compliance. Similarly, when I talk about the data strobe and DQS timing, here again setup time and hold time remains same concept. So here I take VIHAC as reference and VILAC as reference. So this is my setup time, and similarly for hold time I take VIHDC and I take VILDC. So this gives my hold time. So always we need to ensure that, okay, as an analysis engineer, we have options to get the timing parameters either for AC thresholds or for DC thresholds. Both options is supported by the analysis tools to decide on what should be the timing. So this both options are available. Either we can go for AC or DC, and almost all IBS models supports this option of getting your timing evaluated based on AC thresholds or DC thresholds. And now coming to overshoot and undershoot margin. So whenever we see that, okay, for maximum amplitude that DDR3 can go is up to 400 millivolt. So beyond 400 millivolt, it is not going to be in compliance with the JEDEC, and it sure tells that, okay, that is not going to pass my JEDEC compliance. So in that case, I need to make sure that, okay, I use my ODT wisely and make sure that, okay, bring down those reflections. Initially, even before choosing the ODT, I need to ensure that whether all these DDR signals have proper return path. So that is my first criteria. If that itself is not proper, and then I may not be able to control even if I am using my ODT. ODT is just to fine tune your reflections rather than having too much dependency on only ODT. See, the first dependency is whether these signals have proper return path in terms of ground or in terms of power. So only then I can fine tune it to meet my JEDEC compliance with using the ODT. So in case of DDR3, 400 millivolt is the acceptable overshoot and undershoot. And in case of DDR3, they accept DDR4, sorry, it is 300 millivolt. So anything above 300 millivolt, my DDR results will fail, and I may get my eye to be closed to the margin what is specified by JEDEC. So some of the DDR changes that we can expect from DDR4 to 5. So since DDR5 is very much new and we have slowly started working on DDR5, so here we can see that, okay, VRM will now be available on DIMM separately. So for that we need to have the PMIC as the power management IC, that is PMIC 5000 and PMIC 5010, which is recommended by Renesas. Okay, there are other PMICs also available from NXP and other vendors, but PMIC is one that is recommended by Renesas. Okay, so here it is now going to be separately available. Earlier it was within the DIMM module. Okay, now we have on-die ECC, that is we have on-die error correction code which dynamically corrects whatever the single bit errors we get when we are writing the data or reading the data. And we have the duty cycle adjuster. So memory controller can adjust the DRAM internal DQS DQ duty cycle, so to meet our specifications of our memory controller. And decision feedback, that is my DFE, is now 4-tap DFE, which is better for equalizing my DQ signals, which gives me a better eye opening as compared to DDR4. So key differences, if you see between DDR4 and DDR5, the data rate. So if you see data rate, maximum was 3.2 Gbps in DDR4, and now we are able to clock 6.4 Gbps in case of DDR5. So probably all our 5G phones will be DDR5 enabled, not DDR4, because the bandwidth that is to be supported for 5G network is provided only with DDR5. So advantages: higher bandwidth, 4800 DDR5 4800 initial designs. So IO voltage of 1.2 volt, and DDR5 it is around 1.1 volt. Advantage is again low power in compared to DDR4, not dramatic but significant. Power management on the motherboard, it was available in DDR4. Now you will have it on DIMM with PMIC as the separate IC to generate the power management. So power management is going to be much better in case of DDR5 as compared to DDR4. And channel architecture, we have 72-bit data channel, that is 64 data plus 8 ECC, 1 channel per DIMM. And in case of DDR5, 40-bit data channel, 132 data plus 8 ECC, 2 channel per DIMM. As I told you that, okay, it supports 2 into 32 channel architecture when compared to 8 only in case of DDR4. Higher memory efficiency is achieved and lower latency because of the channel architecture. So burst length again BC4 BL8, and in case of DDR5 BC8 and BL16, which probably gives me higher memory efficiency. maximum die density is 16 GB, whereas DDR5 we can go up to 64 GB, higher capacity DIMMs when compared advantage what we get from DDR5. Okay, so we do have our upcoming webinar on HDI technology. Again, in HDI technology, we will be focusing on if at all you are planning for an HDI design, what are the parameters you need to consider, keeping cost in mind, and what will be the material that you need to choose, what will be the adequate possible advantages and disadvantages. Okay, stack up recommendations or stack up suggestions that you need to take. So all this will be covered in our upcoming webinar, that is on HDI technology, which is registered to happen tomorrow between 4:30 p.m. to probably 5:45 or 6:15 p.m. And if at all if you could not make it for this webinar, probably you can ask us. We can share the recording of this webinar. You can go through the recording, and probably if you have any queries, then you can get back to us, or you can also have a 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A session sort of thing once you complete that recording of that particular webinar. Okay, so now I would like to open for any discussions that you people want to have regarding the webinar. Thank you all. I think probably everybody are unmuted. It will be good if you can unmute yourself and ask the question, or still you can type in the chat box.
Yeah, thank you, Anjanappa. Raghavendra, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was a really good session. Thanks a lot.
yeah.
And
Thank you.
I don't have any specific questions for now, but is it possible
Okay.
to get this presentation shared
Sure,
with
sure. I
us?
will share it. Yeah, I will share. Probably can I share it to Anshu, or I will do one thing. I will take the email ID of all the registered participants, and I will share it.
Yeah, yep. Thank you.
Yeah, probably if you still have any queries or if you want more information, see, this is just from overall perspective. See, if I say that, okay, we can talk only on timing analysis itself for probably 1.5 hours. Okay, so this is just some overview. Probably DDR5, again, I told just I've given a glimpse of DDR5. I can still go in depth for DDR5 and what are the challenges that we may face as hardware designers or layout designers. That and all also we have planned in our upcoming webinars.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So in that case, you can directly say that, okay. But any queries related to this webinar, always welcome. I will share the presentation. For that mail itself, you can reply with queries. So I wanted to know more about this, so that I will reply to that mail.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Hello. Anybody else have questions? You can either unmute yourself or you can type in the chat box.
See, we have custom platform based on IMX8 it is. So
Okay.
LPDDR4.
Mhm.
So where the thing is like we have the software running in successfully in couple of boards, whereas remaining 8 boards, almost 10
Okay.
boards they have manufactured. So only 2 boards we are able to get it working,
Okay.
which proves that again the hardware design is also fine.
Okay.
Okay. So the doubts were on the memories from also, like for example, see these 2 boards is working, right? That means that the hardware design wise it is fine. The two
Yeah,
boards
hardware
were
design wise is fine, and probably
correct.
the testing is successful, and probably the memories on the board also are fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you
So
are telling in the remaining 8 boards you are having the issues.
correct. So
Yeah, yeah.
it may not be memory issue, but
Mhm.
in case sometimes we have also faced that the tuning of DDR
Mhm.
is required to be done for each board actually, and then we come at a common value for all the boards.
Correct. Correct.
So any suggestion on that ground actually, some parameters this is something you can check at first, something like that.
No, that is what. See, the moment you say, have you checked on the calibration of your leveling? So maybe because see, in one board, maybe they when you mount your BGA, so there may be additional copper that may be there. So which may have some tolerance in your, because of which you may have that issues. So these things matter only when probably when you are working with higher speeds like DDR4, LPDDR4. So in that case, you may have to vary your parameters in your leveling. That can be done. If you check, it will be better. And or else other issue could potentially be the yield of the PCBs that you get, because sometimes we have also faced with some PCBs where we tried all these options but it didn't work. Finally we came to know that okay, it is the yield of the PCB. So probably if I fabricate 6 PCB, probably 2 will work fine for me, another 4 won't work for me. So in that case it is the yield. In the yield again you have to go and assure that okay, whether my fabricator is reliable or not in terms of that. So probably I say better yield is given by IQ in India, and about other countries, I think Taiwan is more reliable rather than China. So that is again depends on the yield of the PCB.
Okay. Sorry,
Yeah,
in between,
for that, for that I think we need to analyze again whether that
I could
particular
not hear some of
fabricator.
yeah.
Yeah, for that we need to again check whether that fabricator has given us boards with better yield, because he might have used something else for some PCBs. And see, sometimes what happens is reusable materials are there, especially if you go for Chinese fabricators. For some PCBs they use proper material, for some PCBs they may use reusable material. In that case you may face such issues where only 2 boards will work fine, another 4 boards may not work.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
maybe
with
if you have something related to that, now if you can share further, I can just investigate on that.
yeah,
Hello.
sure, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. You do
We
that.
can
Yeah.
still get it work. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Anand. Yeah.
So at any time, if at all anybody has any queries, probably I will share this presentation. You can go through the presentation again anywhere, any queries. If you get it, please don't hesitate. Please mail your queries so that I will be happy to assist you. And probably if you need better clarity, probably we can have another small 15-20 minutes WebEx call and discuss our queries further on that. Okay. I hope if no more questions, I can end the session. Hello.
Yeah, I think we can close it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Arun. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Raghavendra. Bye.
Thank you.